To me, engineering is about taking risks and experimentation. In my mind, the only rule when recording is whatever sounds best wins. And there's a few different types of microphones I use when I record. The first is a dynamic microphone that people know, like the Shure 57 or 58. It's often used live. You can hold it in your hand, unlike some microphones. And what I mean by a dynamic microphone is exactly what you put in is exactly what comes out. There's no real change of it. If you scream this loud, it's going to be that loud coming out. Whereas a condenser microphone, like this guy over here, this is the Neumann U87, a very famous mic. People used it on John Coltrane's saxophone, and Elvis sang into it. All kinds of people use this for all kinds of things. It's a condenser microphone, so it's a lot different than a dynamic microphone because it changes the sound. It kind of compresses the distance, like a telephoto lens compresses the distance between foreground and background. A condenser mic kind of takes things from very far away or close and makes them more the same. It's great on vocals, horns, over a drummer to get cymbals. It's great for all kinds of things. And one of my favorite microphones is the ribbon microphone. This is a Coles 4038, and it was made famous. They used it a lot on the Beatles albums as a drum overhead on Ringo Starr. It does something to cymbals that no other mic does. It is inherently darker. It doesn't pick up frequencies higher up in the spectrum, and it kind of makes your cymbals sound more like sugar, less harsh and more sweet and round. The one thing about it is you can't make any air on a ribbon microphone. If you were to blow in it or sneeze on it, it would be ruined. So it's very delicate. I think that you have to have a ribbon to sound like a ribbon, and you have to have a condenser to sound like a condenser. They make a lot of plugins that do magical things, but they don't have one that makes a dynamic sound like a condenser or a condenser sound like a ribbon. That's something you have to have the actual mic to achieve that particular sound. Choosing the mic, yeah, is an important thing. This goes back to one of my rules, whatever sounds best wins. So people might teach you, or it might say in a book, you have to use a dynamic microphone. You can't use a condenser on a kick drum, or really, try it out and see what you think, is my advice, because some of the coolest sounds I've ever gotten were because I used something that you weren't supposed to on something that you should never do.
And is there another element of placement?
Placement is really important. It's really easy to just put a mic somewhere and then adjust the treble and bass to make it the way you want. But before you even reach for treble and bass and adjustments, you can do a lot of the same thing just by moving the microphone around. So I do think that placement is really important, and you can spend a lot of time just moving a matter of inches or millimeters, and can make a huge difference on the tonality of a drum or a guitar, or speaker, or anything really. Well, it's one of the harder things to get right, because you're working with, when you're recording a guitar or a voice, it's usually one source and one or two microphones. When you're recording drums, you're dealing with, a lot of different individual sounds, and, typically when I record drums, I use between 10 and 14 microphones just on the drum kit. So you're dealing with a lot of complex relationships between the mics, phase relationships. I think that being able to hear the difference between the different sounds is something that's learnable. I think a lot of it comes down to personal taste. In any art, if you're good at what you do and people agree with your taste, then people are going to think you're great at your job. Some people record drums very dry and very closed. I'm more of a fan of using the room and putting mics very far away from the drums and trying to get more vintage, kind of roomy drum sounds. But in order to do that, you need a room with 14, 15 plus foot ceilings. And a lot of people record drums in their bedroom or in their basement and don't have high ceilings in a large room to do it in. So, obviously the environment you're in affects it a lot.
When I first walk into a room, the very first thing I'm concerned about is monitoring. I am really concerned about making sure that what I'm hearing from the monitors is something I can interpret. Now, accuracy in monitoring that is something that comes down to personal taste, to a certain extent. You need to go in and have like reference CDs that you always bring with you, and it's important to have CDs that not only sound really, really good, but also to have CDs that have flaws. Where maybe the vocal's a little too low, or the bass is a little bloated, or whatever. So, or maybe something's not particularly wide sounding, it's really narrow. You need to have those kinds of CDs in your collection as well, so you can check to see if it's revealing those problems. Because if you're only listening to stuff that's perfect, stuff that's perfect. The great thing about it is that it plays back perfectly on just about anything you play it on, and so you need to have both the CDs that are great sounding and CDs that are flawed. So I always bring along recordings that I've made that I know are flawed because I'm so intimate, with those records, and I know like where the problems are. And then I bring back, bring stuff that I've done that I like. I bring stuff that other people have done that I like, and check it out to make sure that's right. I'm not afraid to, when I walk into a room, I start moving things around. If you're going to move monitors, you've got to make sure you get permission to do that. Don't just like grab the NS10s and start moving them around. You don't know. Somebody may have paid someone a lot of money to place those perfectly. So you have to get permission, but I'm not afraid to go ask for permission and start moving around until I like it. The other thing I'll do is I'll do a certain amount of temporary acoustic treatment. Maybe move some fiberglass or even packing blankets or whatever into key spots in the room to try to absorb bass, or set up panels to get different reflections, just to again try and bring some excitement into the monitoring and try to make it more even, deal with any problems there might be. That's the first thing. The other thing I make sure when I walk into a room is I go and listen to the acoustics, which means, go grab a drum and hit it. Walk around the room, have someone else hit it, and move around the room until you find where it sounds good. Go sing in a room and listen to how the acoustics affect it. And check out what they have for equipment. I have particular ideas about equipment. Like I prefer transformer balance FET microphones, condenser microphones, like a U87 for room mics. That's what I'll always reach for first, over a tube mic, over a ribbon mic. I always reach for those first because I like how they sound for that. So I start looking around, and I tend to have these types of preferences for everything. I know what kinds of preamps I like for certain situations. I know what kind of compressors I like, and I start to do kind of an inventory of what they have, and figure out, okay, what's more important here? What's the top priority? And I start putting that equipment in place. I always check the instruments that are there to make sure they're functioning right. It's really important that you also check on the availability of things like drum heads. See if there's any rental houses in town in case you need more mics or pre's or EQs. I always check and make sure that everybody has strings. If you're working with guys who are like seasoned pros, you usually don't have to worry about that. But when you have a band who's walking in and they, recording isn't what they do for a living, they need someone, to go, hey, do you have this stuff? If not, we should send someone to go get it, because you don't want to have to halt a session and run, 30, 40 minutes to Guitar Center, to get, a bass string. That's ridiculous. So I try and make sure that we have those types of things and we're ready. And then you have to think about things like isolation, or how much bleed you're going to let happen between instruments. And so again, that's sort of acoustics, checking out booths, checking out what's the situation. Are we going to use a bass amp or just go direct? Should we have people in the control room tracking? Should they all be out in the room together? You start to consider all those factors, and create a scenario in your head that will work, depending on the style, depending on what kind of equipment and facilities you have. My approach to tracking a lead vocal is to look at the producer and say, have fun. Because normally, I don't get involved a whole lot with it. I obviously have tracked a ton of vocals, but for the most part, if I'm not producing, and I don't usually produce, I like engineering. I don't want to sit in the producer's seat most days, so I don't get really involved with that. But I'll work with a producer to get a sound. But usually it's a fairly straightforward affair in that I will set up a few mics based on listening to the singer, and certain singers have particular kinds of voices. So after a while, you sort of get a feel for, is this person going to sound good on on a U87, or are they going to prefer a C12, or are they going to prefer a 57 or whatever. There's all kinds of mics that you can use for that. You just get a feel for it, and by understanding the style and the singers, you can kind of guess it's going to fall somewhere in this family of microphones. And so I'll set up those microphones that are my best guess, usually 3 or 4. I try not to go crazy and do big 12 mic shootouts, because that it wears out a vocalist, and I think it's disrespectful. You should just be able to quickly know which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. So then I will set that up and have them just go up to the mic and sing a very short segment into each of the mics, and usually everyone in the room kind of agrees there's one that wins, for various reasons, but usually there's a clear winner. And then we move on from there. Like, we set up quickly plug in a compressor and possibly an EQ, and then get to work. I try not to be too fussy about it, because singers, they wear out. Even the best vocalists, they have a window of time where they're going to give you a great performance, and it's usually very early.
I think you have to find a platform that you feel comfortable working with. If it's Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase or whatever it is, you have to have at least one good preamp. The digital recording is what it needs to enhance and make the sound warmer. Is how we get the sound into the computer is very important. So a mic pre will be an important unit that you want to have. A couple of good microphones definitely help. Good set of speakers that you can monitor stuff and hear exactly what's going on, and you're ready to go.
What does a preamp do exactly?
A preamp is a unit that basically you run the signal through it into the converter, into the digital converter, in this case the Pro Tools. So a mic pre, some of them will have tube in them, some of them are just transistor, but they're shaping the sound as it go in. Means if you record with a specific mic running through a mic pre and into the system, you can use different mic pre's for different sounds. If you want a warmer sound or a punchier sound, there are processors basically. That's what a mic pre does.
Mixing is one of the many fun aspects and one of the many really difficult aspects of recording. It's, again, like other things I was talking about, the clearer idea you have going in, the less painful it can be, because mixing can be really painful because you can be really unsure, and it makes such a huge difference. You know, the subtlest changes can really affect the story you're telling. I like to sort of go back to what kind of a story is being told. Something that a lot of, you know, I don't know if other people think of it that way. Some people, I think a lot, you know, sort of like, how does it sound? And of course you want it to sound good, but the clearer idea you have of what the story of the song is, the better notion you have to guide you when you're mixing. So, you know, mixing, I mean, traditionally it's a matter of you sort of get your drums into a point where they're sitting roughly well with each other, and I mean, this is sort of a common thing. You sort of add the bass in, you sort of build it from the skeleton or the ground up that way, and then start adding the elements. But you want to make sure your foundation is clean and doing what you want first, and then you can add all the other stuff. You know, another thing that a lot of I think home recordists forget is the most important thing. It's so boring, it's so much less fun. The most important thing is, where is the vocal sitting? I mean, you know, it is by a wide margin the most important thing in the mix, and it's such a bore because it's not that creative. You know, I mean, it can be creative. You can do creative things with effects and so forth, but generally, you know, it's just getting it to sit in the right spot where it either is hovering over the mix or occasionally gets slightly buried by the instruments in a way that creates drama, where it sounds like the singer is fighting through the mix, can also be good, but sort of focusing on what's happening in the story of the song, so that, you know, not that you're doing any crazy, like, effecty things to tell the story, but just be clear about what you're trying to deliver. And generally what you're trying to deliver is the vocalist, and the instrument's power is kind of helping support that. I think a lot of people recording at home get lost with the genius of their ideas, you know, their instrumental things and their effects, and then they put the vocal in, it just kind of sits there, usually a little too low, and it kind of sits there. And vocalists are all over the place, and generally I spend a lot of time writing a vocal, you know, particularly if you're recording at home, where you can really draw out the level of the vocal, or if you're working in a studio where you have either, you know, or probably both great compressors and also automation in your mixing, you know, a word here or there can make a song. I mean, I'm a believer that, or can, more importantly, can ruin a song if there are elements, points where a key line gets dropped, or it's not that, even if it's at a point where people don't necessarily consciously notice that, oh, the vocal's too loud or the vocal's too quiet, because it's not that too loud or that too quiet, but if it's a little off, the listener has to work in a way that it's unpleasant, I think, without them realizing, and the reaction becomes, I don't know, it's not really grabbing me, or whatever. They don't know why, but that subtle difference keeps people with the vocalist, you know, knowing when to be a little loud and when to be a little soft. And so that's something that, you know, is not fun to do because it's so painstaking, but it's essential.
It's an extension of performance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly. I mean, when you're mixing, it's like very much an element. It's like, you know, there've been, like, I've done vocal mixes in you know, where with automation, and you you see the level on the, and even with a compressor on it, the level of the vocal is, I mean, it's going, you know, it's like shaking around on every words and parts of words and sweeping up and doing doing totally crazy things. So in a way, it is performing, but you're trying to get the best performance, and sometimes you get it, and particularly these days, I don't think people have the same mic technique that in another generation, Lennon or Frank Sinatra, all those guys, like, I've read stories, but they all really knew how to work a microphone to like get the perfect level that they wanted. But people today, generally those techniques have been, I think, somewhat lost. So it means that the guys mixing have to kind of do it for the singer, which is painstaking but really important. It's too bad that they don't know how to do that. But if you watch, I mean, I've heard Lennon in the studio used to do these like things of like putting his hand in front of his mouth on certain words to like cut his P's and stuff, and turning away, and or if you watch those old 60s perform, they're doing all this kind of stuff, and you see kids now, and it's and they're here, and it's like sometimes you don't want it in your face, and you need to not just back it up, but sometimes like points where you want it to sound a little quieter, but then you also want to add a little more reverb at that point. So there are things that like that I'll do, that we're actually changing the level of reverb depending on the word to get it to sit in the mix. So whatever, I'm talking a lot about the least fun part of mixing, but I think it's the most important part, and it's a part that a lot of people, I think, don't pay as much attention to.
So many people want to make a record and are able to make a record up until this point. You can buy a Pro Tools M-Box, you can buy a $150 microphone and sing, you can play all your instruments, MIDI or whatever and all that kind of stuff, and get it to the point that it's mixed. You can mix it in your bedroom. I mean, this is all stuff that's done in people's bedrooms and garages and all that stuff. And then a lot of them don't know that there's another step. They just, all right, it's recorded, it's mixed. I put it on my iPod, I do this and whatever. I put the EQ on my iPod or whatever it is they do, and they think they're done with the record. Well, it should be mastered. I mean, it really needs to be done by somebody who does mastering. I mean, there's programs that you were asking me about that said they can master it, but it's, there are algorithms that say, okay, rock, and you set it up, and all of a sudden it gets louder and a little bit, harsher and all that kind of stuff. But it definitely takes the mix that was down here and puts it up here. So, all right, it's mastered. Well, if they bring it into somebody like me, because I've had this happen, where they've done this kind of thing, and they go, man, I don't know, maybe we should just check this out. So they bring it into me, and they'll play me what they've done, and then they give me the flat version, and I'll do what I do as a test. I mean, I offer this to people. They, if they don't know what they're getting into, if they don't think it's a necessary process to do, send me a song. I'll do it for free. I'll get it back to you. You can hear the difference between what you've either done or the flat to what I've done. And 99.9% of the time, they call me back and say, when can we come in?
Mastering it's a musical enhancement, okay? It's the equivalent of, if you think of photography, it would be, okay, if you go into Photoshop, you take a picture, the content is already decided. In Photoshop, you could frame it, you can enhance the colors, you could change the mood or the impact of that photo using Photoshop. In the old days, it would be in a developing process where they would use different chemicals, different lengths of time in the baths or whatever. Okay, what mastering does, it takes something that's already been done, and someone interprets that if it's done in just a little bit of a different way, sonically, it will have more impact. Impact is probably the word that best describes it, because with impact, you can plug that into all different genres. Okay, if it's just someone with a nylon string acoustic guitar and a vocal, and it's sitting there and it sounds very muffled, in mastering you can take that 2-track. Now generally you're working with stereo only. You're not working with the tracks. In mixing, you're working with all the different elements. In mastering, you're working with the final mix down in 2 tracks, which is changing a little bit. I'll maybe describe that later. And you're taking those 2 tracks, and with the equipment that we have and the ears that we have, we can do this impact enhancement on that music, no matter what it is. Okay, if it's a jazz album, maybe the acoustic bass player was recorded okay but not great, and his part is intrinsic to that, but somehow in the mixing they didn't quite get there. You know, I'm kind of like a judge, but I'm a judge that can kind of criticize and judge, but also move it to the next level. This is why people will come from all different parts of the world and use us, or sense them from all parts of the world. Because they send you something finished, and you send something back that sounds the same, but it sounds better. Okay? That's really what we do. That's the most general way that anyone can understand the process of mastering. On top of that, you need to learn how to edit the project together in whatever format it's going to be. If it's a CD, it's 12 or 15 songs. We're able to put those in the sequence that it's supposed to be. Not a complicated job. If the songs are too long, because the album is too long, we can edit them. Okay, so we were all expert editors, and we can offer advice on editing.
Because bands, hip-hop artists, people doing beat tracks, solo artists are everywhere. They're in your school, they're in your church, they're in your town, they're there. If you want to be recording, you can be recording. It's almost like being in a band today. I mean, until recently, to get anywhere as a band, you needed the president of Sony Music or Warner Brothers to bless you. You don't need that anymore. You want to make a CD, go make a CD. Not that hard. How good it's going to be is up to you, but you don't need anyone's permission.